Thank you, everyone, for joining. I'm Dave McDonald, Managing Director of Publicis Commerce here in the U.S. And today we wanted to just talk about the NRF's big show. I probably get the easiest job on here. I get to introduce somebody who doesn't need an introduction. Jason, Retailgeek Goldberg will take us through the retail show. It was a bit, all I'd say, it was a big show. It was really interesting, but with Jason, I'll hand it over to you to take through some of the themes that you saw throughout the show.
Hey, thanks, Dave. And yeah, you're exactly right. It's such a big show. There's so many things going on. There's no way we could possibly cover everything in a webinar. So what I've tried to do is kind of create a good overview of all the different kinds of things that are going on and a framework of what I think are some of the key themes that emerge. And we'll give some examples of each of those that you and I noticed. And then hopefully we'll leave some time for questions or discussion. So if folks have a question or comment about any of this, feel free to send it and we'll either answer it live on the webinar or we'll make sure we get back to you after the fact. But in the highly unlikely event that any of you don't get enough of us in the next hour, the great news is there's now like 400 more hours of me on the interweb, which I know is exciting news. But I have a much smarter friend, Scott Wingo, and he and I talk about these kinds of things every few weeks on the podcast. I'm sure we'll do a NRF recap coming up. So feel free to tune into the podcast if you're so inclined. Scott's parents spelled his name wrong, so there's only one T in Scott. Dave and I were talking before the show, this show is always a little hard to get motivated for because it's over a weekend. It's almost always over a holiday weekend, as it was this year. And there's an annual blizzard in New York City every time this show happens. And everybody's like, can't we talk the NRF into moving it? Can't we have a better, warmer venue or a different time of year? And the answer is no. This is the 113th year of this show. It's a very long-standing tradition, and despite the fact that there's a bunch of inconveniences about the show, it's highly unlikely to change. The retail cadence of the year is just set around this show and has been since before any of us were born. So that's the reality of the situation. Perhaps the scariest, most depressing stat of this entire show is that during NRF this year, New York had a snowfall, and it was the first snowfall in over 700 days, which from a climate standpoint is terrifying to me. And I felt super lucky that I got out of the blistering cold in Chicago just to bring the snow with me to New York. So sorry about that, New Yorkers. So the main things going on at this show, there is a very large convention center. There's over 1,000 booths. The booths are split into 3 floors. So there's the ground floor, which is the main floor, which is the biggest, most established booths. There's downstairs, which tends to be newer exhibitors. For a long time, that's where a lot of the digital exhibitors were, because it was the long established, point of sale vendors and cash register folks that were on the main floor. So one of the first trends that I noticed is a lot of the digital exhibitors that used to be in the basement have now graduated to the main floor. So a lot of the big digital players that you and I all think of when we think of retail are now part of the ground floor. So certainly Amazon had a very large booth. They were demonstrating their Just Walk Out technology. They actually announced a new version of Just Walk Out. Just Walk Out is based on a large density of cameras that watch customers shop and tally up your total and charge your credit card when you walk out of the store. And one of the downsides has always been the cost of all these cameras, the electricity to run all these cameras, and the labor to hang all these cameras. So at NRF, they announced a new version that's using NFC tags in the product, which is, frankly, when they first announced Just Walk Out technology, however many years ago, it's what we assumed they were all doing. And we were all surprised to hear they were using cameras. So I'm not sure they're prepared to say the cameras were wrong, but they now have 2 approaches to Just Walk Out. And they've announced some new partnerships with hospitals to let doctors check out medical supplies using the Just Walk Out technology. They also had a lot of their payment ecosystem. So they had Pay with Prime, Buy with Prime, which is a service you can use to have Amazon fulfill orders on your own website and use Amazon stored payment information. They had Amazon One, which is their technology for paying with your palm. This is now deployed in, I think, all Whole Foods. I think Panera Bread is using them as a payment method. And they were showing the next generation of their Dash Cart, which is this smart enabled cart that takes pictures of everything you put in it, so it keeps track of what's in the cart, gives you promotional messages on a screen that you see as you're pushing the cart around. At the moment, just an Amazon Fresh Store, but I believe these carts are available for license for others. So this is a pretty typical big booth at the show. There were a lot of other digital exhibitors that kind of graduated to the main floor this year, including Walmart and Shopify and others. So it's starting to feel more like a digital show at the NRF, which is totally appropriate. In addition to all these exhibits, of course, one of the big draws at NRF is always the keynotes. So there's 20 keynotes this year, and it's a mix of very credible retailers, usually the CEO of that retailer, talking about some new initiatives or learnings at various retail stores. So the chairman of the NRF board this year is John Furner, who's the president of Walmart USA. So he was on stage a number of times. Mark Belioff, the CEO of Salesforce. Michelle Gass, who used to be the CEO at Kohl's, she's just about to become the CEO of Levi's. Hal Lawton, the CEO of Tractor Supply, a number of other major industry leaders, but then also some celebrities. So Magic Johnson, not Michael Jordan, for those of us in Chicago, but Magic Johnson was there. I feel like the most important thing to take away from his keynote is we all have had great competition in our life that made us better, but he still really hates Larry Bird. I feel like was sort of his key takeaway. We also had Martha Stewart, who's talking about her brand and some of the amazing consumer experiences that she's been a part of. Drew Barrymore talked about her brand, which she developed, and they now sell exclusively at Walmart. So it's a Walmart-owned brand. So a lot of interesting keynotes. The CEO of FedEx announced a new commerce platform, a rebranded version of ShopRunner called FDX. Not a lot of details were provided at the show, but that was sort of a big announcement on the NRF stage. And then in addition to these keynotes, there were hundreds of sessions. So there were dozens of these like curated sections on these three big stages. And I was lucky enough to participate in one of those. And then there's hundreds of what are called big idea sessions, which are sponsored by an exhibitor and take place at smaller auditoriums inside of the exhibit hall. So we'll talk later about a few of those. A highlight for me of NRF in recent years is they have a third trade show floor that's upstairs at the Javits Center. So you've got the basement is kind of newer exhibitors. You've got the ground floor is the biggest, most established exhibitors. So that's IBM, Microsoft, SAP, Oracle, Salesforce, all those guys. And then upstairs is the innovation hub. And these tend to be smaller exhibitors that maybe aren't ready to invest in their own booth yet, but they get a stand. And these tend to be generally new companies with innovative ideas. It's a lot of international brands that are coming to introduce their products to the US retail market. And while there's some sort of half-baked and overly optimistic ideas in the innovation lab, it's also where some of the most interesting and at the risk of cliche, innovative stuff is. Not surprisingly, there's a lot of AI and robots at the innovation lab this year. We'll talk about a couple of those folks as we go through it. And then new to NRF this year is an extra portion of the exhibit hall in the downstairs area that's called the Food Service Innovation Zone. So this is dedicated to booths and vendors that are particularly focused on food service. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So those are kind of the main goings on at NRF. You've got your keynotes, you've got your featured sessions, you have your big idea sessions, you have the 3 exhibit floors, and then you have an awful lot of cocktail parties that happen after hours. Those will not be covered in this recap. That'll be a separate recap we'll do just on the cocktail parties. But so across all of these events, in my mind, there were really 4 big themes that emerged. Most of them I don't think will be a huge surprise to folks on this webinar, but by far the biggest theme is this idea of AI. And I always struggle to talk about this because it simultaneously is overhyped, overbuzzed. There's a bunch of vendors that are kind of snow jobbing us by calling their product AI when it probably isn't. There's 1,000 exhibitors at NRF this year. 283 of them use AI in their title description in the thing. So more than a quarter of all exhibitors, like in their first sentence, said they're an AI company, which is probably not always true. For some, it is true. But while at one level, this is kind of overhyped and overbuzzed, and AI this year was metaverse last year or augmented reality the year before that. There's a lot of reasons to be very confident that in many ways AI isn't hyped enough and is going to be the most disruptive thing to happen to commerce since the advent of the internet and digital commerce. And so it is a super important trend. Some sort of highlights of AI for me. Walmart this month made a bunch of AI-centric announcements about enhancements to their customer experience. And side note, fun fact, Walmart has a large booth on the main floor at NRF. And it's right next door to their good friends from Seattle at Amazon. So that's kind of a fun battle of the giants, like on the main exhibit floor. But Walmart was showing a lot of innovations at NRF that they actually debuted a week earlier at CES. So somewhat surprisingly, Walmart took a booth at CES. Doug McMillan gave a keynote to open CES, and in that keynote they announced a bunch of new consumer initiatives that are focused on AI. So the first thing they announced is that a generative AI search engine is now built into their iOS app. So if you have the Walmart app on your Apple phone, you can open it right now, and if you can type full sentences and ask for keto recommendations or the best way to host a glitter party or whatever it is you're interested in, and get some more personalized, specific answers to your search queries. They're not the first retailer to do this. Instacart has had a generative AI in their search for some time, but this is starting to see a very big trend. As a side note, an open question is whether the best way to deliver this functionality to the customer is in the search box, because we spent the last 30 years teaching customers how to type keywords into that search box. And so when you add this generative AI capability to search, customers aren't necessarily discovering it or using it right away. So I think it's an open question what the best UI for these new generative AI tools is in search. But the announcement I was personally more interested in from Walmart is what they're calling auto replenishment. So lots of retailers already have subscribe and save or subscription programs. This is an AI-based program where you essentially give the Walmart AI permission to add items to your cart. Now, at the moment, it's not actually buying those items and sending them to their home without your intervention, but it's adding items to your cart based on your usage patterns and consumption. And so this is sort of the earliest version that I'm aware of this long-term promise that we've always had in e-commerce, that really no one should ever run out of peanut butter for their kids' school lunches. Nobody should ever run out of toilet paper. That we shouldn't need sensors or cameras or things to do this. That the amount of data that we already share with these retailers is enough to use these AI engines to predict what kinds of things I'd like to buy. And so Walmart is one of the first retailers I know that's rolling this out at scale with a new auto replenishment shopping feature. A pain point that Walmart has always had and that many retailers have that's been exacerbated by enhanced security as a result of organized retail crime is in Sam's Club, you have to do a receipt check on your way out. You have to walk by and have someone look at your receipt and verify that you paid for all the items that are in your cart. Many people, consumers consider that a point of extra friction or even demeaning. And Sam's Club announced that they are doing away with receipt checking, and that instead they're using AI and cameras that are looking at your cart to take the place of those humans that were stopping you at the door. So this is a new way in which it'll be easier to walk out of a Sam's Club than it is a Costco because of AI. Walmart also announced they're expanding their drone delivery service. So I had a chance to visit their drone delivery pilot in Arkansas in December, and we've all been talking about drone delivery and use cases where maybe it makes sense. It's a whole different thing to see a bunch of drones launching over your head and going to a bunch of consumers' houses. It's pretty cool. But the expansion is announcing drone delivery for 75% of the population of Dallas. So I think David McDonald on this call is going to be our new consumer tester as we start to get all kinds of random and hopefully embarrassing items delivered to Dave's backyard. So more coming on that. And then of course, Walmart also reiterated that their first and most interesting use case they had for AI, they rolled out last year, which was AI for the sales associate. So every Walmart associate gets a handheld device, and it includes a generative AI knowledge base that all those employees can use. So lots of these kinds of innovations happening, not just from Walmart, but they were a good sort of example of a lot of these new AI experiences that retailers are rolling out. Google has a big booth on the main floor, and a number of interesting AI use cases from Google, as you can imagine. But the one I want to highlight first is the AI-based ad buying, and the big innovation in this, which is it's called Performance Max, is that by all accounts, talking to all the best practitioners, Performance Max now works. It essentially buys ads better than humans, and places them to win more engaged audiences more cost effectively. And this is very game changing. The whole digital ad business was based on keywords and based on expert media buyers picking your media and helping to best utilize your budget. And we're now to the point where we are in most cases going to get better performance by handing over all those duties to a black box that we don't completely understand. And so that's very disruptive from an organizational change standpoint, how you work with your media teams at Publicis and elsewhere. And these kinds of things are like the early examples of AI really disrupting sort of business as usual. Another AI innovation at Google that I'm particularly interested in is what Google calls the Vision AI API. And what this lets you do is hand product images from product detail pages to the API, and it will write hundreds of product attributes for that product based on that image. And so you can imagine if you're a retailer with a very large catalog and you're trying to get that catalog as rich as you can, your partners at Profitero are telling you that your data isn't rich enough and it's very expensive to enhance all the data for every SKU in your catalog. You can now use this AI to fill in a lot of the gaps in your catalog instantly. This is super interesting for re-commerce. When you think about someone like Goodwill Finds that's creating product detail pages for an item they have one of, that maybe they don't have an actual relationship with the manufacturer of that item. So now they can use the Vision AI API to write a product detail page for that members only jacket that they have for sale in one store. So that's particularly interesting. Those of us that are super old timers will remember when a big part of this show was search vendors all fighting with each other over whether you should use Endeca or Solar or Elastopath in your e-commerce search platform. That all kind of died, and the search built into every platform was good enough. But now we're starting to see third-party search emerge again, and one big player is Google, which has a Vertex AI-based search engine. Victoria's Secret and others have adapted that, so this is one way to get that large language model generative AI in your search engine. This also helps you for recommendations and things like that. And then Google and Amazon and Microsoft are all in a race to create hundreds of commerce microservices that are available in their cloud platforms, because one of the biggest trends in IT for retail is migrating all of those workloads to the cloud, and the cost of ownership benefits that come with that. And so you're seeing lots of innovation there. I mentioned the Innovation Pavilion, lots of vendors in the Innovation Pavilion that are focused on AI. One that I spent some time with that seems really interesting and has some pretty credible retail and brand case studies already is Typeface. So there's a lot of point solutions out there that make one part of the customer shopping experience better. They send emails and they use AI to write better headlines for your emails, or they use AI to write better headlines for your Google product listing ads, or they create a landing page for your Facebook ads instead of sending someone to a product detail page, or they use AI to improve one particular point solution. Typeface is a good example of a whole genre of these vendors that are aggregating data from all these different touch points, that are using all the enterprise data that's available to them, that really benefit from a CDP when you have a CDP, and then use AI to improve these customer touch points with AI-based personalization at all touch points. So a tool like Typeface will let you have dynamic landing pages for your digital ads, have dynamic product recommendations in your search engine, have dynamic promotions in your emails, and all of these things simultaneously. And when you learn from one touch point, it improves all the other touch points. So these kinds of tools are very interesting. I think we're going to see a lot more of this kind of innovation, either as separate point solutions or built into the platforms this year. I can't spend too much more time on AI, but two things I just want to remind everyone of that are super important. All of this AI is only as good as the data you can train it with. And one of the things I'm still surprised how many people overlook is you probably can't train your AI models with data that you haven't explicitly collected with permission to use for AI training. So you for sure need to be updating your privacy policies and your data governance to make sure that you're going to be compliant with all the increasingly strict regulation around AI and personalization. And so I'm imploring everyone that hasn't updated their data governance for the AI world to do so immediately. That's the first and earliest step you should be taking in your AI journey. And then, a bunch of people are going to argue with me about how good these experiences are. Some of them are amazing. Some of them, are still a little flawed. There was a joke at the show that one thing that AI has done is it's increased all of our tolerance for demos that don't really work all that well, because a lot of these things are a little rough on the trade show floor, and they require a little bit of imagination or suspension of belief, which is not my own strong suit. But here's what I want to remind you: even if you don't think some of these experiences are amazing right now, this is the worst these experiences will ever be. And this is why I feel like it's so obvious that AI is going to be the most important trend of the year and one of the most disruptive trends in commerce since Jeff Bezos got in his car and left Florida in 1993. As good as all these experiences are on the trade show floor at NRF, they're all already better today than they were then. And they're going to be vastly better at NRF next year. You just can't say the same about humans. I'm almost certain to be more stupid next year than I am this year. And the AI version of me will hopefully be much smarter. And so if you graph that out, there will certainly come a time when we're going to have to hand the keys to the vast majority of these shopping experiences to AI-based solutions. Whether that's right now, a month from now, or 12 months from now is really the only open question. So that's AI. Love to hear what you think. The second big trend that we're talking about at the show is the impact of the evolution of Chinese businesses on Western consumers. So this was the topic of the session I actually did. I co-hosted a session with Deb Weinswig from the founder of Coresight, who's an expert in China and spends a lot of time in market over there. And we had a packed crowd talking about the impact that these new business models of Chinese companies coming to the West, coming to the US, and the effect that they're having on Western consumers. So if you're not following this closely, the two that we're talking about the most are called Shein. If you get nothing else out of this webinar, I just taught you the proper way to pronounce Shein. It's a shortening of the phrase she's inside or she's an insider. So it's an American phrase. It's in English. They shortened it to Shein. Shein was founded in 2008. They were a wedding dress provider. They pivoted to selling general apparel in 2013. Fast forward 9 years later, they're the largest apparel retailer in the United States of America. They likely sold over $30 billion worth of apparel in the US this year. They're excuse me. We believe they've filed a confidential filing to do an IPO on a U.S. stock market this year. Regulators will probably have something to say about that, but that's going to be an interesting story to watch. But this is a company that's essentially 8 years old that has become the market leader in one of the biggest apparel companies in the world. And then another interesting one is Temu. Temu is owned by ByteDance, which is TikTok here in the, by Pinduoduo, which is, Pinduoduo is one of the largest e-commerce players in China. Temu is not available in China. It's just available in international markets, including the US. And it also is an amalgamation of an English phrase. It's team up, price down. So Temu. And Temu launched at the Super Bowl last year, November of 2022. We believe that they have sold more than $12 billion in the US this year. So in the first year of business, achieving a $12 billion run rate is very prodigious. They're a marketplace. Shein added a marketplace this year. And there's a lot of interesting things about both of these companies. The first thing I like to remind people, and this is a framework that Joe at Marketplace Pulse sort of invented, but that if you think about the original Chinese model, it was factories making stuff and selling it to Sears, that Sears sold to Americans, right? So that was China as a manufacturer. That was China 1.0. Then China 2.0 was these Chinese factories making stuff that they sold on marketplaces like Amazon and eBay and Walmart, that then get sold to US consumers. And so, the signature company here might be Anchor, for example, one of the leading companies in the computer peripheral space. And that was China 2.0. And now this is Chinese factories being their own brand and being their own retailer and building a direct relationship with Western consumers. This is China 3.0. This is what we're talking about with Temu. This is what we're talking about with Shein. We probably also are talking about this with the TikTok marketplace, which is owned by ByteDance. And so this is a very big deal. I just quickly graphed some of the traditional retailers' web traffic. This is how many unique visitors Target, Walmart, and Amazon get every month. And roughly, Walmart gets twice as many visitors a month as Target. Amazon gets twice as many visitors a month as Walmart. And then you look at Shein, which is 8 years old and only sells apparel until about October of 2023. And they nearly have approached Target's web traffic. Target's a general merchant with 60,000 items. Shein just sells clothes. Shein has almost as much traffic as Target does. And then we talked about Temu, launched in November of 22, and they now have more traffic than Target. So these Chinese brands are winning the hearts and minds of US consumers, and they're changing the US consumers' expectations for customer experiences across everyone. I mentioned earlier that per Bloomberg second measure, Shein is now the largest apparel reseller in the US. They're larger than H&M, they're larger than Zara. They probably sell more clothes than Walmart or Macy's. And one of the super interesting things about the Shein model is that they essentially have AI bots scraping TikTok looking for trends, and then they run a reverse auction with 4,000 factories and say, who wants to make a 200 of this new apparel trend for us to test? And they put those items up for sale within a week of seeing the trend on TikTok. And if they sell out in a matter of seconds, they place a reorder for tens of thousands. And so this is sort of real time matching supply to demand. And if you think about how disruptive this is, the Gap, which is one of the most successful, most dominant apparel retailers in the history of the United States of America, on average makes about 4,000 SKUs a year. And they were wildly disrupted by Zara and H&M that were fast fashion, where the Gap's original supply chain took 18 months to invent a skinny jean and bring it to market. The Zara's and H&M's could do it in 6 to 12 months. And so instead of 4,000 SKUs a year, they were selling 25,000 SKUs a year. And that was wildly disruptive to the Gap and their peers. Shein makes 6,000 SKUs a day. And there's lots of conversations about the pros and cons of this model, but I want to tell you one of the pros you may not be thinking about. Shein sells everything they make because they're perfectly matching supply to demand. They only make enough apparel for actual consumer demand. All of these other models, fast fashion, traditional fashion, luxury fashion, make way more of items than consumers tend to buy. And they're therefore forced to discount a huge amount of product. And even worse, they're forced to dispose of a bunch of product that no consumer ever wears. So this real-time model using AI and listening to the customer instead of telling the customer what to buy is super interesting. China is way ahead of Western brands in doing this. Their marketing is also very strong. They rely heavily on micro-influencers on social media platforms. This is an assortment of haul videos for Shein clothes. And you'll note, that they've received 4.5 billion views, which is more than half of the Earth's population, have watched the Shein haul video. That as with other digital native brands, after they reached a certain scale, they've expanded to brick and mortar. So here in Chicago, where I live, they have a full-time Shein store, but they also have partnered with Forever 21, and they have a shop-in-shop in Forever 21. Right before NRF is the annual shopping center trade show, and the CEO of Authentic Brands, which is a company that's bought a lot of the distressed and bankrupt apparel brands that are in malls. He talked about Shein, and he said he bought Forever 21 out of bankruptcy, and that it was the worst decision he ever made because he failed to anticipate how Shein and Temu would disrupt the US consumer, and that they're probably way bigger than the talking heads like Jason Goldberg are estimating. So he was implying my 30 billion estimate was low. And he said that he felt that the only thing saving Forever 21 is partnering with Shein, because those sort of traditional Western brands are just not prepared to compete with this new fast AI model. They're also doing a lot of interesting things like virtual fitment, that you can do inside of Instagram to see how the clothes look on you, things like that. Of course, trust is always a big deal in commerce. When you're buying products from a Chinese company, there probably are extra trust issues. People worry a lot about shipping. The previous generations of Chinese companies were very slow shippers, like AliExpress or Wish. The Shein and Temu, it's uneven. They're shipping to major cities like Chicago is actually quite fast. They're shipping to smaller cities is still a work in progress, but they do a lot of interesting things to engender trust. Both companies guarantee a shipping time, and they give you cash if they don't hit that shipping time. And so that's a big deal for engendering trust. They have very good communications about their shipping. And they show you ratings and reviews from other customers specifically rating their fulfillment, not just the product. So lots of interesting things to build trust. And then, of course, the last big point about these companies is that they're heavily leveraging gamification. And so when you come to Temu's site, you can spin the wheel to win a discount that day. You can open surprise gift boxes. Temu has rolled out group buying now, so you can entice your friends to buy something with you and get a better deal for all of you. And all of the affiliate programs and influencer marketing is all gamified as well. So the more successful you are as an affiliate, the more you recruit other affiliates, the more you can earn. And this is a really smart way to amplify their presence. And they're not hiring sort of traditional spokespeople and buying traditional media, in most cases on social. Obviously, Temu has bought some Super Bowl ads, but they're leveraging this viral influencer marketing to have a huge footprint and huge visibility on the social where a lot of decisions are made. I'm sorry, I'm trying to go fast to make sure we have a little time left. The third big trend is margins. So for those that don't know, 2023 was not the most awesome year in the history of US retail. We grew about 2.3%, which is much lower than our historical growth rate and way lower than the last 3 years, which have been atypically fast. And one of the impacts there is a lot of retailers didn't make the margins that they usually expect to make. And in fact, there's a report from Wells Fargo that says, like, in soft goods, margins are the lowest they've been in 15 years. So both brands and retailers are struggling to make the net income that they're expecting to make. And I really think you're going to see a major focus in 2024 on improving profitability, improving margins. And so a lot of the trends at NRF this year were about things that help improve a retailer's margin. There's nothing that improves a retailer's margin more than selling ads to the customers that come in to buy stuff. So if you're on this conference, you almost certainly have heard about and talked a lot about retail media networks in the last 2 years. Not a surprise that this was also a big theme at NRF. And in fact, StrataCash had a separate event the day before at NRF. They were able to get over 500 attendees for their retail media network day, making NRF even longer and more over a weekend. So I'm super thrilled about that. Spoiler alert on retail media networks. A lot of the innovations at NRF are about moving that retail media network from that website to digital experiences inside of brick and mortar stores. So I feel like this has been a theme at NRF for the last 20 years, is that digital is coming in store, but this is now a much higher ROI reason that we're starting to see digital come in stores, as all these retail media networks try to leverage the big audiences they have in stores. Another way to improve margins is to let robots do more stuff. And so it was important to work this trend in so I could show you the goofy picture of me next to Marty the robot. I won't tell you which of us picked those glasses first. But there's a lot of automation at NRF. It's a big part of the show. In that upper left is a inventory robot that scans the shelf, understands merchandising compliance and inventory levels. There's lots of automated robots, both for fulfillment centers, but for micro fulfillment centers in the back of stores, and even unpacking brick and mortar stores or grocery stores. There's also in food service an awful lot of automation around making and delivering food. So that's a big trend. There's a lot of just walk out technologies automating the checkout service. This is a robot making French fries, which Dave McDonald and I think stood and watched for about 3 hours, if I'm not mistaken, because it's kind of enthralling to think about an unlimited supply of French fries. But sort of fun fact, next to that robot was another big trend in automation, is these automated lockers, right? So you've seen a lot of really bad loss prevention solutions that stores have rolled out. At NRF, you're starting to see more elegant versions of these lower shrink experiences that take some of the friction away from the customer to picking up orders and protecting inventory while still making it relatively frictionless to buy stuff. So lots of interesting things there. Several of the keynotes talked about innovations in AI for supply chain. So Mark Bilioff who's the CEO at Salesforce, talked about how one of their main use cases for AI is reducing returns by analyzing the reasons that people return stuff and changing product detail pages with AI to minimize returns. Nextopal is a company that was on the exhibit floor that was started by some Publicis alum that's really focused on AI technology sitting on top of your traditional order management system to highly optimize your supply chain, get the right products to the right places at the right price point, and save a lot of money and improve margins. I mentioned Hal Lawton, the CEO of Tractor Supply, did a keynote. One of the use cases for AI he had in his keynote was all the employees in a Tractor Supply wear audio headsets from a company called Theatro, and they use that for expediting, for saying, hey, a customer just walked in the front and they're looking for horse feed or whatever the case may be is. And they've now augmented those headsets with generative AI. And so employees are able to ask voice questions to a generative AI bot that answers them. The AI bot's able to listen to an employee's conversation with a customer and suggest additional information or helpful suggestions to improve that human-to-human interaction. That's in 500 Tractor Supply stores, and they said they're going to expand that to the whole chain this year. So lots of interesting improvements in AI. Of course, another thing for improving margins is moving everything to the cloud. So I mentioned Shopify moved from downstairs to upstairs. They had a big booth. Harvey, the president of Shopify, joined the NRF board, and he gave one of the keynotes. He brought several Shopify brands onto a keynote stage this year. And essentially it's not if, but when all these retailers are going to move all their workloads to the cloud. It's sort of won out as the cost-effective model going forward. There are things like the Mock Alliance that are getting a ton of traction. They had their own venue at NRF where they were hosting customers in the Mock house. And all the big traditional legacy IT providers are all really focused on their cloud solutions now. And along the lines of margins, not formally part of the show, but happening concurrently with the show, we also saw a lot of retailers making unpleasant announcements about cutting costs, right? So we saw Macy's cut 2,300 headquarters jobs, close more stores. We saw Stitch Fix doing away with their full-time stylist program. We saw Wayfair cutting 1,600 jobs. There have been more announcements since I made this slide talking about retailers that are cutting costs. This is the first step that we're going to see in a year-long tightening of the belt on behalf of a lot of retailers in response to this sort of lean year of 2.5% growth that we had last year. And you're going to see the best retailers in the ecosystem really outperform and shine this year. But I think you're going to see a lot of retailers that were not executing particularly well are really going to experience extra pain this year. And so that, to me, is one of the most unfortunate parts of this whole thing. And then the last trend I mentioned was food. Food is interesting for a couple of reasons. It's one of the biggest discretionary categories of consumer spending. Grocery and restaurants together are about 25% of retail. It's being heavily digitally disrupted. Before COVID, digital wasn't very much of a thing in food. Now it's a huge thing. Now it's become a dedicated track with its own sessions, its own trade show floor at the NRF. A ton of it is around the automation of service. So AI taking your order at the drive-through instead of a human. Instead of, do you want fries with that? It's really intelligent, personalized recommendations to upsell you and improve the margins of the product. Then it's AI automation and robots making the food and expediting how quickly the food is available. And in many cases, it's automated delivery technology getting the food to the customer wherever he or she wants to consume it, whether it's on-prem, off-prem, at home, all of those things. So a lot of disruption in food. One of the interesting byproducts of this disruption is there used to be a lot of what I call swim lanes in food, where grocery only competed with other grocery and QSR only competed with other QSR, meal kits only competed with other meal kits. And really, the digital enablement of all these touch points has made it quite easy for all of these providers to compete for every calorie wherever the consumer wants to consume it. And so the good news is as a provider in this space, you have a much bigger addressable market, a larger TAM. The bad news is you have a lot more competition for that TAM than you've ever had before. So those are the four themes that were sort of my takeaways from NRF. I'd love to answer any questions or hear from any other folks that might have attended and had their own observations or questions. So I hope that's helpful, and I appreciate everyone's attention. I know Dave may have had to run to another meeting. So Mary, I don't know if you're aware of any questions that have come through.
Hey, Jason, I just pulled two into the chat for you.
Okay. There
was one on AI and another one on Shein.
Awesome. Shein. I'm training everyone. Shein. So first question, AI for auto replenishment is a really interesting use case for retailers. It could be really impactful. I'm curious if any single retailer's AI is capable of taking into account purchases made at other retailers. Is this an opportunity for retail agnostic clean room solutions to be able to predict needs based on buying behavior across retailers? So whoever wrote that question, that's a great question. Let's you and me quit these corporate gigs and let's start a company to do that, because that's a great idea. I'm just kidding. You could probably find better partners than me. But the short answer is I haven't seen exactly that yet. There is a ton of competition right now for every byte of consumer data. And so you can think about some of the retailers that have migrated from being retailers to being platforms, right? So think about Amazon and Buy with Prime being an example of, you're not even shopping on Amazon's site, but Amazon's now getting more consumer data about your consumption patterns that they can use to train their auto replenishment engines. Think about Shopify collecting all that data across their whole ecosystem of sellers. Think about Walmart delivering purchases from Home Depot and others using their Spark delivery network. All of these network plays, one part of that play is to enhance the share of customer data that they're collecting, and the person with the largest share of customer data is going to be able to deliver the best version of this auto replenishment. But in terms of a formal sort of brokering and partnering with this data across competitors, I haven't seen that yet. About the closest I've seen to that is some retailers that are sharing customer CDPs for sort of joint retail media networks. I think the biggest example of that is probably in Europe with Carrefour and their partners. But I do agree that this is the direction it's heading. So that's a great question. Let me know how your business goes and if I can invest. And then the other question is, Shein sells everything they make, but do you know if they resell returns? I would imagine there's a significant amount of waste generated by returns if they offer free returns. So sort of. I don't know what their disposition is for the returns that they physically get back. I will tell you they've publicly stated that their return rate is far lower than other retailers. So they claim to have about a 6% return rate, which traditional apparel retailers online have like a 30% return rate, like in the 10s to 20 in stores. So if true that it's 6% and they're a private company, we don't have any totally legit data to go by. If they do an IPO, we'll know a lot more. If it's true they only have 6% returns, it's a pretty minimal problem, and that's another learning we can take for them. A big reason why they potentially have low returns is the price points, right? If the cost is so cheap, you worry less about returning it. I can also tell you that Shein and Temu both take back less goods than traditional retailers. So very often when you try to return something, they're going to give you credit, but they're not going to ask you to send the product back, right? And so they're not getting the product back. They're not paying for the reverse logistics. And so they're not having to do any disposition on those return goods, or at least in a much smaller problem than a traditional retailer. And lastly, I will tell you, there is one nuance to their free returns. They constrain the amount of free returns you're able to make. So I think the base case is that you're allowed one free return a month. And then there's some constraints on what you can return beyond that, depending on how good a customer you are. And so they are trying to manage sort of both sides of that relationship. So great question. I've seen a couple other questions pop up. My friend Michael Klein sent me a question. Video commerce. I saw fireworks had a significant presence downstairs. Paria was in the innovation lab. I actually didn't see them, so I'm gonna have to check them out. Thanks, Michael. That's Paria. Is this year that video commerce finally takes off here in the US? One-to-one, one-to-many? Great question. This is one of the ones we've been talking about for a while. I could see it going either way. What I'm very bearish on, meaning I am not very confident on, is live streaming commerce. So a lot of people conflate live streaming with video commerce, right? And so this notion that you're watching some influencer sell a product while they're producing the video, and that you're only going to watch the video live and buy live, I don't think fits very many use cases in the US. It is popular in China. It's actually popular predominantly with like a lot of scarce products. So picture farmers in tier 3 cities that are live streaming their produce, and they're selling their apples online. And when they run out of apples, they're out of apples, right? And then the next day's apple is another live stream, not a replay of the existing live stream. That model, there's way less scarcity in the US for that model. And so for that reason, I'm not super bullish on live streaming, but video commerce is a whole nother deal. There's a lot of interesting pilots. I was following the ROM commerce from Walmart super carefully this year. To me, that's a great example of thinking about what the future might look like for video commerce. Certainly the TikTok run rate, which is mostly video commerce, short form video commerce, they've been doing it for 3 months, and they're probably on a run rate to sell $4 billion a year through that platform. So I do think there's going to be some interesting cases for ROM commerce or for video commerce. Michael corrected me. It's Parla, Parla, not, I misread it. So we'll have to check them all out. Thanks for that. But I do think it's mostly one-to-many right now, Michael, and it's mostly stored video. One-to-one video is super interesting for sales associates, being subject matter experts and broadcasting from a store to a remote customer. And then, of course, AI generated one-to-one content is super interesting. For those that don't know, all 100,000 Publicis employees got a custom video Christmas card from Artur and Maurice this year. So that was pretty impressive and cool. So I have another question. Thank you. This was super informative. I couldn't agree more. That's a very, very prescient comment, Victoria. I'm just kidding. Oh gosh, that was just a compliment. She said it was one of the best webinars she's attended in a while. Thank you so much for that. Appreciate it. Glad it added value. Look forward to chatting about it more. Mary, I don't see any other questions imminently. Did we get everything?
I think we did. And we are recording this so we can share, so people can share with their teams and clients and kind of everyone. So thanks everyone for joining. Thank you, Jason, as always, for leading.
My pleasure. I'm gonna have to use AI to get some more coffee here real quick, and then we'll say until next time, happy commercing.